Welcome to our look back at some great recent NBR interviews in NBR Interviews. I'm Paul Brennan, and coming up, Smith City's latest moves, New Zealand's biggest law firm taking on the Big Four, National Party leader Judith Collins pre the party's conference, the book review, and there's more. First up, should political party donations be capped for people and corporations? The Opportunities Party, which started with a big donation from its founder Gareth Morgan, wants to put a stop to large political donations. Joining NBR's political editor recently was Opportunities Party leader Shai Navitt.
So the rationale behind any sort of cap is to make sure that all citizens actually do have equal political power. And so at the moment we have wealthy people obviously have a greater capacity to donate to political parties or politicians of their choice. And the idea with a cap is you really try and level out that playing field. And so in order to do so, the caps need to be at a level within the reach of the ordinary citizen.
Isn't there a little bit of an irony here, though, in that top was started by Gareth Morgan, who put a lot of money into starting the party? And I mean, you guys might not really be in the position you are now without that money.
Absolutely, and I think that reinforces the point that if we hadn't have had, whatever it was, close to $3 million at the outset, we probably wouldn't be here today. And that's incredibly damning on what should be free and fair elections to allow any new political challengers to come in and really try and fight for political power. And so you're absolutely right. I don't think we would be here without that either.
I mean, some people argue that a political party, the fact that it can raise money, and if that includes, getting relatively big contributions from either individuals or corporates, that's a reflection of how they're able to build support. And if you can't get that, tough luck.
There's a bit to unpack with that because I've heard that argument before. So first of all, access to democracy shouldn't be means tested. And the fact of the matter is certain industries, certain sectors of society are going to have more money already. And so whether we're talking about property investors who perhaps would traditionally have voted for National Law Act, though of course these days they're probably happy with their investments, but compare that to your typical unions and your teachers and your nurses, they're going to naturally have a different ability to financially contribute. And so it shouldn't be about market forces here. We're talking about access to democracy.
And you'd also, I think, cut out corporate donations and any overseas donations. Is that correct?
That's right. And at the moment, of course, because companies and corporations can donate, there's a huge loophole there for overseas money. We don't know a lot of the time where that's coming from. And so it's about transparency as well when it's just a citizen who has the ability to donate, and all about, again, it comes back to restoring political power back to citizens equally.
But what about, there are corporates who argue they want to contribute to democracy, and is there a de facto arrangement where maybe the donations should go to the Electoral Commission that then should distribute it evenly among the political parties?
There's certainly scope for the Electoral Commission to play a far bigger role in exercising and administering its responsibilities. That could be one, but it wouldn't still achieve the purpose that we're talking about, which is ensuring that it is really citizens who feel that they're the ones who are affecting political outcomes here. Because again, if you allow corporate money, if you allow lobbyist groups to continue to donate, they're going to have a greater influence.
In terms of the party vote threshold, do you want it just scrapped altogether, or would you bring it down to a lower level than 5%?
Well, certainly my preference, and we think it's fairer to get rid of it altogether. The rationale, if it ever existed, certainly doesn't exist at the moment, which was this idea that you need some threshold to ensure that there's always stability in government. But what we've had are examples in 2008 and 2014 and subsequent where we've had coalition governments that comprise single or two seats, and we have not had any issues with any suggestions of unstable governments. And so it's difficult to see that wanting to block out a party simply because they will have one or two seats is a risk. It just needs to go. And so if that rationale's not there, it no longer makes sense to block out. Last year, blocking out almost 8% of people who voted are not represented. And so that is a significant proportion.
I mean, is there a fairness issue too, in the sense that, and I think your party has probably been, if you like, a victim of this, where a party wins more party vote but isn't in Parliament than another party that's won less party vote across the country, but because they've managed to win an electorate seat, get representation.
And that's exactly right. And the coattailing issue is another point. And the Electoral Commission, again back in 2012, they made a number of recommendations, and getting rid of coattailing was one of them, because it does lead to those distortions like you just mentioned. But
might it lead to even more breakup of the bigger parties if different people felt, oh, well, they could get in, and in that sense lead to more instability?
If there were more voices in Parliament, you're not going to create more instability. I think we've seen that, and the entire point of an MMP system is to increase representation. And even though we've had MMP for so long, there's still a lot of this idea that you still need to pick between red and blue. And the idea that you can fit an entire country into two camps is quite ridiculous in this day and age, and the diversity and greater representation of views is so critical.
Opportunities Party leader Shai Navitt with NBR's political editor Brent Edwards there. This is NBR Interviews, featuring great interviews popular with NBR subscribers. As homewares retailer Smith City announces its newest South Island store, its chief executive isn't ruling out a move back into the Auckland market. The Christchurch headquartered retailer is building a 2,300 square metre store in Hornby in the city's rapidly growing southwest. Joining NBR co-editor Fiona Rotherham was Smith City CEO Tony Allison.
We've looked at a number of sites, but we've got a strong presence in Christchurch and having somewhere in Hornby. We've got north, we've got middle of Christchurch, but we haven't got down the southwest side. So strategically a good space for us.
Do you have more stores planned?
We do. So we're always working on other opportunities. What they look like and when they come to pass is always a different story.
So last year when, there was a change of ownership, there was talked about 5 new stores opening in 2021. Has COVID affected those plans at all? Or
I wouldn't say COVID has. Actually, COVID's been, in terms of the back end of coming out of COVID, it's been quite good for us. So the expansion is really about the right place, the right opportunity, having the right people. So and it's not growth for the sake of growth, it's the right growth in the right place.
So have you altered those sort of plans, that number 5, or is that still sort of what you're thinking?
I think 5 is probably optimistic. We've got, so with we added the Colombo, we moved from Lower Hutt to Petone, and with Hornby coming on, if we added another 1 or 2 in the next couple of years, that would be great.
How would you categorise the state of the homewares market at the moment? Are people nesting?
Oh, they are, definitely. I think it's positively erratic is probably how I'd explain it. So positive in terms of there's quite a lot, retail was good. There's a lot of purchasing going on. I think people are nesting and there's we're seeing little sweet spots come through. But it's erratic in terms of supply and making sure you can get what you need when you need it. So that's the positively erratic part of it.
So are you still having problems with shipping?
Yes. So I think that's more, but both in terms of cost, reliability, and just getting what you need when you need it. It's just hard to get that transparency. I think if you look back, 2 years ago, you can plan 2, 3, 4 months out. You know what you're going to get, when you're going to receive it, and it's pretty reliable. But that supply chain is all over the place.
Any idea when that's going to be fixed, or?
Oh, there's talk about being at least 12 to 18 months away. There's quite a lot of demand, I think, through the China-US route is taking a lot of shipping demand. So trying to get it down to New Zealand has been difficult. And then it's in where do we fit in the priority list.
How's online going compared to in-store?
It's growing better than in-store, but to be expected. I think coming out of the back of COVID, it's seeing a lot of people probably realising that buying online is not as scary as they thought it was. And the supply chain now in place for that, and delivery is really good. And even seeing people buying things that we don't normally see, things like beds, and sometimes we'll see, the other hard furniture and soft furniture getting sold through there. But typically the wideware in the CE space, you'll see that sell through online, but we're seeing in other areas now, which is positive.
Do you have any figures around that, or what the out of your revenue, what percentage is online?
Not off the top of my head, no.
How likely is it that you would move back into the Auckland market?
Given the right opportunity, given me the right space, and give me the right people, I'm there.
And how hard are all those three things?
Hard, that's why it hasn't been straight away. And I think, Smith City has struggled there in the past, and other businesses have too. So I think it's being in the right place at the right time and not being in a rush to get there.
And how's the revamp and rebrand of the stores going overall?
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I think there's been a real leg up for us. So making that decision to rebrand, and I guess it's just a reflection on the new owners and how we want to operate the business. So it's a good chance for us to have a look at what we offer, what we're about, and that's starting to resonate. Just that the 100% Kiwi owned does resonate through our customers. The other thing is the cheeky disposition we're bringing to our marketing and how we're approaching things is also getting a bit of cut through, which we're enjoying.
And how hands-on is Colin Neal?
Well, he's obviously he's a director, he's part of our governance group, but for example, in the last 2 days, him and I have travelled Dunedin, Alexandria, Wanaka and Queenstown, so we had a bit of time in the car and a bit of a chat, so hands-on, but definitely leaves us to do our job.
What do you think is the key thing that's going to lead to growth for the brand?
I think for us it's probably leveraging off the brand that we have, and so we're quite a sticky brand, and when people find us and use us, they come back, and it's probably just leveraging off that, and also looking at our range and seeing what else we can add to our range to just increase that basket.
So what sort of things are you thinking?
Well, for example, we've got flooring in 5 of our stores now, so that's a good example where could we do more of that. We've got window coverings in 2 stores at the moment. Could we do more of that? So there are examples where we could see, with partnerships, we could actually build that part of the business.
Homewares retailer Smith City's CEO Tony Allison with NBR co-editor Fiona Rotherham. You're watching NBR Interviews, compiled highlights from recent video interviews popular at nbr.co.nz. The country's largest law firm is meeting the possible challenge of the Big Four accountancy firms head-on with the launch of a consulting business. The new service line, CT Consulting, has been in planning since April last year and will be headed by tax partner Bevan Miles, who was Hamish McNichol's guest.
So really kicked off the consideration and proper around April last year. So, a fun thing to be thinking about during lockdown. The why has been, I guess, if we think about internal and external elements. So internally, thinking about consulting offering as something that was a pretty natural adjacency to what we offer as a large commercial law firm at the moment. So an area that we thought we could quite easily branch out into. And then the external piece was really client demand driven. So looking at the pace of regulatory change, what our clients are dealing with, and a need to help them deal with a change in law and then implement that more broadly across their business.
Yeah, so understanding what the law is, what it says, but then also how do you respond?
That's right. Yeah, right. That's right. So you could take an example of a bank that's responding to a regulatory change, needs to understand what the law is, but there's going to be multiple touch points across the organisation that the bank needs to kind of get their hands around and go and talk to their various teams to implement. Yeah.
So what sort of areas do you think you'll be focusing on?
Yep, so initial focus has been primarily around risk advisory and governance. Examples there would be working with financial institutions around conduct and culture type issues, other regulatory change impacting on them. We've also got a really excellent climate risk experts within the firm, so some of our conversations with clients have focused on climate risk and upcoming financial reporting disclosures in that space as well.
How are you staffing the team to begin with? Is there sort of a dedicated consulting team?
Yeah, so we've drawn entirely from within the firm, but pulled together a smallish team of about 7 with 3 partners, including me, and then supported by some of our other senior people. We've tried to pull in a mix of different expertise within that team, and then we're drawing on subject matter experts from the wider firm as we need them. So this, saying starting with a legal change, looking at, okay, well, what's that legal subject matter? Who are the people that are experts within the firm, and getting them to assist us.
So sort of identifying opportunities where you think there's a little bit more that you can help. Okay.
Yep.
And so I guess in terms of the space in New Zealand, law firms haven't really got into this just yet. Denton's Kensington Swan have said that they're looking at doing something similar here. Who are you competing against? How are you going to take them on? What's the point of difference?
Yeah, so competing primarily would see the big four CA firms as our most direct competitors in the space. With the law firms, as we've been doing little bits around the edges as well. What we think we've got to offer, so we're a large commercial law firm with a breadth of legal expertise, and with all due respect to the legal arms of local CA firms, I think we'd fairly claim to have a deeper set of legal expertise there. So where we're looking at matters that start with legal change, we think we've got a nose in front in terms of dealing with that.
And you've already done a bit of client work on this front as well. What's some of the initial work look like? What's the feedback been? Yeah,
so initial work's been really mixed. I think we set out having an idea of what we thought we'd be working in the space, and what we've actually found is that there's just so much regulatory change. So you look at financial institutions really suffering under the burden of a lot of change. It's really been picking different things to help them with. So, some examples have been there's new triple CFA due diligence obligations coming in, imposing new obligations on directors and senior managers. We've worked with our bank to help them around their policy for dealing with that. We've picked up some bits of work around helping clients with the financial delegation authority matrix, working with a client now around a review of an obligations library, so a collection of legal and regulatory obligations to make sure that remains current and accurate.
Mm-hmm. And so aspirations for the first little while, looking to hire externally, perhaps dedicated consulting expertise as well?
Yeah, so I think in the short term, really, really pleased with the response we've had from clients, but we're just continuing to build that brand awareness, so running some regular forums, get people along, just help get over the question of, should we be going to lawyers for this? So hopefully it becomes obvious, yes, you should. So that's a sort of short-term goal, and then building on that initial work we've been doing, building the touch points with our clients, and then longer term, like to see an increasing volume of work, and we think that that will mean we do need to hire in externally to build the size of the team that we have.
Chapman Tripp tax partner Bevan Miles with NBR's Hamish McNichol there. This is NBR Interviews, featuring great interviews popular with NBR subscribers. National Party leader Judith Collins was expecting the party's annual conference on August 7th and 8th to clear the air. The party's board has been heavily criticised for candidate selections, and those points have been raised in the party's report on the election. There's also the debate she says arose from an opinion piece Kaikoura MP Stuart Smith wrote for his local paper, suggesting there should be a referendum on whether to call the country Aotearoa or not. Just before the conference, Judith Collins sat down with our political editor, Brent Edwards.
It's very clear that some traditional national voters were so bemused by what was going on last year, and I think also the whole COVID thing too really made them very frightened. They gave their votes to Labour, thinking that would stop the Greens. So we heard this countlessly. And of course it didn't stop the Greens, because Labour took the Greens in. It didn't matter what we said, they were thinking like that. And what they've seen now is that this government has moved to do things that they promised they wouldn't do around taxes, that they have brought in things that they said they never talked about. They're looking at it and saying this government is just bossy boots government, telling us what to do, telling us what we can think, what we can say, more interest in identity politics, and actually we want the government to get back to what we think the government should be there for. So, we're picking that up with our Demand the Debate campaign, is that we didn't just think of that, it's because that's what people are saying to us. So we have to listen to our voters, but also listen to middle New Zealand that's saying, I'm just not part of this anymore.
So what are the core issues then that you'll focus
Well,
on?
the very core issues are things such as how to grow the economy out of COVID. We cannot simply continue to borrow money and just borrow, hope and spend and whatever. We have debt now that is quite significant. I think it's about 113 billion the last time I spoke to Andrew Bailey the other day about it.
But on the other hand, though, the economy is still growing quite strong, isn't it?
Yes, but it's not just that. It's about knowing there needs to be something more than that. How do we pay back debt? Is that important? So there was a view last year during COVID and the lockdowns, well, we just have to get that money out to keep people going. And look, you have to do that. But there has to come a time when that has to be paid back. So people are actually not just worrying about growing the economy, they're actually worried about how do they keep their businesses operating. So there is a massive skill shortage, as you know, and particularly in the regions around engineers, doctors, nurses, people who in the IT industry. And these are all people, we've got a whole group of, for instance, migrants in New Zealand who are highly skilled, who've come in based on pre-COVID, based on a promise to work hard, do well, be part of New Zealand, have a future here. And they're split from their families, or they're in this limbo land of no resolution around their status. Should they go back home to where they came from, or should they see New Zealand as their home? So we're doing quite a lot around that. We expect to talk about that a lot more. We hope the government will do the right thing by New Zealand, but we're seeing people saying right now they're having to shut down part of their business or refuse to take work on. Or if they're in the hospitality sector, they're saying we won't be open on Mondays or Tuesdays because we can't get staff. And
But is that because they don't pay enough?
No, that's just rubbish, isn't it? Because the minimum wage has gone up, the wages have gone up. You don't just get people by paying money. People have to have skills as well and a willingness to work. So, we'll see unemployment figures. And that's actually the Household Labour Force Survey, which basically means are people willing to do extra work? We've got people saying, businesses saying, small businesses in particular, saying things like, I was an electrician the other day, he was offering a salary that was $650 a week to someone to learn to be an electrician. And this person said, well, I've looked at it, it's not worth it for me. I've got 4 kids at home. That's pretty much what I get on the benefit. $50 more. It's simply not worth it. So one of the things Labor did wrong was that they removed the sanctions around people who don't want to work. And it's not just a matter of working, it's what that does for your children. It's the message that gives there, and it's the lack of hope. So hard to work when you're stuck in a motel somewhere, hard to do these things, but there are ways that we could address some of these. So I'll be talking about quite a lot of that on Sunday.
What about, the issue around terror that came up? Is that a distraction from these issues of substance?
Yes, but it goes further than that. So you might think that unless you'd been around the provinces listening to people in particular talk about this. And that's actually about people saying we're feeling left out from decisions that are being made. And I think, Stuart Smith, who is our MP in Kaikoura, wrote a piece for the local paper saying people are raising this. Should there be a referendum on it? And what's happened since then is that mainstream media have picked it up and really gone with it. And I was saying, well, let's see what people think. If people say, look, it's not important to me, well, that'll be fine. We won't go any further.
How does that fit? Because from that report, I think there was this general recognition that there may be national need to be more inclusive and more diverse. Aren't you in danger of kind of going counter to that?
You can't just be more inclusive and more diverse if you leave people in New Zealand feeling that they can't have a say. That is not being more inclusive. That is actually being quite exclusive. So when we have people who say, look, they didn't grow up with te reo, and they're saying, I can't understand this, or I don't understand what's going on here. have the conversation with them. I actually think it would be quite interesting if you took a poll around New Zealand what they thought. You might be surprised. I personally don't have a problem, but I know that there's a lot of people who feel like there's all this stuff going on identity politics as they see it, and actually, at the meantime, we've got doctors having to leave New Zealand because they're not wanted, supposedly. And places like Otaki losing someone with 1,500 patients. Why? Because he can't get his residence sorted out or is split from his family. I mean, come on, they say, why is the government so focused on this? Why do we have Waka Kotahi, as they are now called, New Zealand Transport Agency, going around spending so much money and time on changing their name, but they could just get some roads built? They've done basically nothing except change their name, rebrand. I don't mind if they change their name. Just get your roads built.
National Party leader Judith Collins with our political editor Brent Edwards. This is NBR Interviews, compiled highlights of recent NBR video interviews. Now the book review by Neville Gibson. The book is Notes from an Apocalypse by Mark O'Connell. Neville joined me in the NBR studio.
O'Connell's an Irishman who's travelled around the world, including to New Zealand, which makes this book locally quite relevant. So he came here, and I read it, sparked by the fact that 2 billionaires have just flown rockets into space, not necessarily outer space, but enough to be interesting.
Well, to go weightless.
Yes, and it was written off by a lot of people as being big egos. These people can afford it, and basically a waste of money. And a lot of the chapters in this book are about the apocalypse, which are end-of-world scenarios where rich people are either going into bunkers to survive what's going to the end of the world by going underground in places like Queenstown, or they want to colonise the moon or Mars. And so it's an interesting way of looking at it.
Sounds like I hate to use the expression, a sort of a conspiracy theory type way of thinking, because people all through history have been energised by what if and discovery and advancing things. It seems to be quite a natural human thing to do, rather than to plan for the apocalypse.
Yeah, when I was reading O'Connell, it's basically a group of essays. I thought of George Orwell. He's got that kind of light touch, it's relevant, but he's also coming at it from quite a left-wing point of view. And he sees this drive for exploration is definitely behind it. One of the essays is devoted to the Mars Society, which he thinks is a bunch of crackpots. But he also relates the drive for exploration and colonisation, like it was in the 18th, 19th and even the 20th century, was a capitalist plot. This is where I would disagree with the book. That's why I read the other book here, which also has quite a big part of it devoted to space, but from a much more balanced and technical point of view.
So what's Mark O'Connell saying, and specifically how it relates to New Zealand, because you mentioned that?
Well, he's particularly interested in Peter Thiel, who was one of the Silicon. He's interested in the Silicon Valley billionaires who differ from the survivalists who are going underground. The Silicon Valley guys are more interested in extending life. They want to get rid of governments. They come from a very libertarian tradition, and Peter Thiel is one of the leaders of this, not just by going into space, but also what they call seascaping, which is setting up utopias where there's no government and people live in a kind of utopia.
As long as they're in charge.
Where there's plenty of money and there's no crime, that kind of thing.
Okay, so let's stay on Peter Thiel. From memory, back in John Key's leadership days, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter Thiel came to New Zealand, became a citizen, I think, of the country, or got residency in very quick time. It caused quite a bit of reporting and debate at the time. And since then, I understand he owns quite a piece of land in that area. So start joining up the dots.
Well, O'Connell came here at the time when that debate was being held, so it's a few years back. And Thiel has a house that he bought, but he bought an existing home, which is quite futuristic looking. But he also bought a sheep station, and O'Connell and his people guiding him around go there, but they didn't find anything more than the haystack. And I understand that Peter Thiel hasn't really done very much. But the interesting thing about Thiel is that he and Elon Musk, who's behind SpaceX.
Well, they're both involved in PayPal together, remember?
Exactly. So they've been working together for 20 years. And so Musk gets quite a lot of coverage as well. But O'Connell basically says these guys are doing a sort of a capitalist version that will bring about an apocalypse. Their argument, of course, would be the reverse, is that socialism is going to be the apocalypse that sends people to Mars and to the moon.
Because if you look at the reaction to both Branson and Bezos's space adventures of recent times, a lot of the commentary has been around, why not spend the money on feeding the children, things like that, sort of rejecting the advancement in technology and achievement, almost like turning your back on that direction and maybe looking back into some, perceived golden age where, some of the greatest advances in thinking have come from engaging in those experiences. One thinks of the Earthrise picture taken over the moon, which launched, I think everybody agrees, the environmental movement that we have today. I wonder how, people, including this chap here, can balance those two things up.
Well, he doesn't make any effort to. I mean, at least with George Orwell, you had a bit of historical perspective as well as personal experience. O'Connell's writing purely on his own observations, and some of it's pretty interesting sort of stuff. So we're Tim Marshall, who's a former foreign correspondent and diplomatic editor of Sky News and
this is the other
Britain.
book you have. Yep,
his chapter in space is basically the great powers are, of course, all into space exploration, but also how private enterprise is coming into it. Like Elon Musk has now got all the major contracts from NASA for the long-range rockets and that sort of thing. So and Musk is focusing on Mars, and so does Marshall. Is not saying that these are crackpots at all, and he lists about dozens of inventions that have come about that people use every day that have come about through the space exploration programs, which of course now are starting to get into a bit. Into a different direction now that you've got private enterprise involved. It means legal rights, all kinds of legal stuff. But he ends it on a rather optimistic note that the world powers have to really get together. And at the moment, Russia and China are outliers. The rest of the world are quite happy to go along with the democratic world and the Artemis Accords. But Russia and China have got different ideas.
I think, was it Trump who created Space Force? That's a tell, isn't it?
Well, this is one of the big threats, is that space becomes militarised, and the possibility, and the Chinese have already proved it, that you can shoot down satellites from Earth.
Good read, even though some might find it a little sort of against what
O'Connell was a good read. He's quite a master, like many Irish writers. It's well written and thought-provoking. Marshall is much more pedestrian. He's got a lot of facts. He also is writing about countries like Saudi Arabia, Australia, sort of the minor powers and how they fit into the world scheme of things, limited by the geography they have, their place on whether they're in warm or cold countries, access to resources, population growth and that sort of thing.
And no bunkers found on Peter Thiel's land?
Not so far, or anywhere in central Otago.
No evidence of consent reports from councils or anything like that?
No quarrying either.
Okay. The full review of Mark O'Connell's Notes from an Apocalypse is at nbr.co.nz right now. And join me again soon as we showcase more of the best NBR video interviews in NBR Interviews. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks again for watching.